all this has happened since we published the maritime policy.
Yeah.
And it would be completely out of date, completely useless if we just had a printed document and you had to wait 2 years to print another one out. By doing it this way, we, with the great staff here at the Navy League, we can update it. We can add these different nuances, see what difference has changed, try to make it simpler. Because quite frankly, where do people get their information now? From their phone. It's got to be.
You got
If
that
you
right.
can't get it on your phone, it doesn't exist.
That's right. Hello, everyone. This is Admiral Jamie Fogo from the Center for Maritime Strategy at the Navy League of the United States in Washington, D.C. You're listening to Maritime Nation, the Center for Maritime Strategy's podcast designed to dive deeply into policy challenges facing America's sea services and the role of the United States as a sea power on the global stage. Thank you to Dataminr for sponsoring Season 4 of Maritime Nation. We are honored today to be joined by 5 distinguished guests, Rear Admiral Sinc Harris, Scott Sundt, Chuck Werchado, Jon Kaskin, and Christian Cabaniss. And I'll introduce each of our guests here before we get started. Sinc Harris retired as a Rear Admiral after a 34-year career in the U.S. Navy. Admiral Harris has served in nearly every ship type. During his time in service, he commanded at every level, including commanding officer of USS Comstock, LSD 45, Commander Amphibious Squadron 4, Iwo Jima Strike Group, Commander Expeditionary Strike Group 5, and Commander U.S. 4th Fleet and Naval Forces South. He has served in peace and war during his career, including Cold War operations, Operation Desert Storm, Operation Enduring Freedom, and Iraqi Freedom, defense support to civil authority, Hurricane Katrina and Rita, humanitarian support to Pakistan, the 2010 floods, non-combative evacuation operations of Lebanon in 2005, and numerous other multinational exercises. During his career, he served in a wide number of assignments ashore, both overseas and in Washington, D.C., on both the OPNAV and Joint Staff. His last assignment was as Vice Director for Operations to the Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. Sinc, great to have you here.
Thank you for having me, sir.
Scott Sundt is a retired Navy captain with over 30 years of active duty service, including command at sea. He's the lead for High Performance Computing Modernization Program Acquisition and Digital Engineering. Yeah, Scott is a great writer, a great friend of the Center for Maritime Strategy for many, many years. Scott, we're delighted to have you here today.
Thank you, Admiral.
Chuck Werchado, no stranger to the Center for Maritime Strategy or to me. He is a senior fellow, as I am, at the Center for Naval Analysis. Previously, he was the Deputy Director of the Assessments Division in the Office of CNO N81, a place where I hung my hat for a couple of years. And as the Navy's Senior Operations Analyst, he was responsible for managing the process and staff used to provide both the capability basis to inform CNO's resource allocation decisions and to accurately represent Navy capabilities in the joint analytic process. Great to have you, Chuck.
Same.
Jon Kaskin, who is one of our guests of 2 online, has a curriculum vitae that's unmatched. But let me just say, Jon is a loyal proponent of the Navy League, a former vice president of the Navy League. He did 25 years on the Navy staff. He's an expert in maritime affairs, and particularly in the maritime administration and merchant marine, but 25 years on Navy staff. He's got us all beat. And Jon told me earlier today that he actually survived 12 N4 admirals on the Navy staff, and that is quite a significant feat. So, Jon, welcome. We're great to have you here today.
Glad to be here.
Christian Cabaniss, also no stranger to me or to the Center for Maritime Strategy, retired Colonel, United States Marine Corps. Christian, great to have you. And I know you were part of the team when I was commander of Naval Forces Europe and Africa overseas, and we were doing things all over the African continent. So thanks for being here today. It's great to have you with Marine Corps expertise, along with Chuck, who represented the Marine Corps acquisition programs at one time as well.
Great to be here, Admiral.
Thanks. Well, folks, let's get started. So today we're going to talk about, we're not going to talk about the book Returning from Ebb Tide, but I shamelessly put it up here because everybody in this room, virtual or otherwise, had something to do with this. This is the atrophy of our maritime industrial base, not just commercial, but warships. And we don't just call out problems. We offer solutions like alternatives to power production on ships, small modular reactors, and what we need to do to revamp and reinvigorate our merchant marine. And a great chapter in there by Jon Kaskin. But we're going to talk about the maritime policy statement here today. And that is something near and dear to the Navy League's heart. My understanding, Sinc, is we do this every other year,
Yes,
right? So it's been recently updated. And Sinc Harris is kind of the chairman of the board, if you will. He's the Frank Sinatra of the maritime policy statement. And so Sinc, just briefly describe for us, what is the Navy League Maritime Policy Statement and why is it important to our members and congressional leadership? And by the way, we just had a great congressional breakfast, a Sea Power breakfast last week. There were 6 members of Congress in that room, including one former Navy SEAL, Congressman Whitman and Congressman Kiggins, who were up on the stage with our own navalist, Dr. Steve Wills, talking about shipbuilding, talking about the future. And this is yet another tool of the Navy League and the policy statement to clarify the needs of the Navy and the sea services to the Congress. So why'd you do this and what does it mean?
Yes, sir. Well, thank you again, Admiral. Thank you for the Center for Maritime Strategy.
Hey,
Of
pleasure
all
to be
the
here.
things that we've done in the Navy League, and I've been a member since I retired in 2015, the most important initiative we have done is the creation of the Center for Maritime Strategy
Thank you.
to be the holistic and deep thinker for our Navy and articulating that to leadership, to the American people. You know, the Navy League's mission is simple: support, educate, and advocate for the maritime forces. And the maritime policy statement kind of fills that gap, an overview.
Amen.
Where you've got the Center for Maritime Strategy goes deep into various areas on a recurring basis. The overview that we use to help educate and advocate to spread the word throughout all of our 30,000 plus members throughout Congress is a maritime policy statement. And we try to keep it at an executive level. We try to focus on what the Navy League believes that the American people need to do to advocate for our maritime nation and for the Navy, Marine Corps, Coast Guard, and the U.S. merchant fleet in a holistic fashion. So that's, in the simplest term, it fills that gap.
Sinc, thanks very much. And it's God's work that's gone into this thing every other year. And it's a document that we used to have in hard copy. We'll talk about that a little later on. And we've kind of come of the digital age here. And so we distribute it digitally, but it's something I keep on my electronic desktop and refer to periodically, because when people ask questions, they want to know, what's the Navy League's policy on this or that in the maritime domain? That's the first document that I go to.
Sure.
Because it is policy that has been vetted and is consistently supported by our CEO, by our chairman, by our board members, and by our team members that are all on this magnificent committee, and it is very helpful. So thank you for that. Scott, let me ask you, what's been the most significant change in the maritime policy statement since it was initially published in January of this year?
Well, thank you, Admiral. I think the way to look at it is Sinc, Admiral Harris here. He had a vision that we were bifurcating our policy statement into just the 4 services. And his idea was to say, wait a minute, to talk about ship size, and all you talk about is ships in the Navy, and all you talk about is Marine Corps size and manpower size and things like that. What we really have, as he's talked about the holistic outlook on there, is that we have functional areas. And if you don't get the context of these areas down, then we can't advocate or teach people. And we find ourselves having to tell people, well, why do I need this many aircraft carriers? Or why do I need this many submarines? Or why do I need this many aircraft and stuff like that? And so the issue was changing the document to address functional areas, because these areas are similar across the 4 maritime services that we look at right now. And I'm talking about things such as in my area that I now do. I used to do just the Navy side of things, but now I do operations, maintenance, and sustainment. Well, those are endemic to all of the 4 different services, and they all have budgetary requirements, and they have different kinds of priorities and stuff like that. But if you don't have that molded into a strategic context from the very beginning, you are just talking about numbers, and the numbers don't mean anything when you're trying to build a fleet that is multifaceted. It's not just the Navy or the Marine Corps or the Coast Guard, which has 17 different mission areas. Well, those mission areas also interface in with the naval services and the Marine Corps. So I think that's the biggest change, and I think it works really, really well, because when you're talking National Defense Authorization Acts and you see, okay, they're gonna plus up this one shipbuilding program, but what does that do to the Coast Guard, and how does that affect the Marine Corps, and how does that affect the whole operational status of where you're trying to put? And now we've seen right now recently that the new national strategic strategy that has just come out, it's kind of changing the way that we've done things for many, many years, for decades. And that change will actually affect force structure, which actually affects operations, which affects maintenance, which affects sustainability. So it's better to take it from a functional perspective, I think, because things are changing on a regular basis here. And as we update the policy, we look at these functional areas as being the key areas that we can advocate for. And when we go across the hill and talk to people, or even talk to members of the Navy League, it's important that they understand it's not just ship size or aircrafts or the Coast Guard. It's all of them together at one time, and it's important to look at it from that way.
Yeah, amen. On the functional areas and the platforms that support these different functions, when you look at, strike missions, there's a lot of discussion nowadays about a golden fleet. The president himself has raised the issue of bring back the battleships. And I think we're going to see clarity on that here soon on what that golden fleet looks like. But, one of the greatest battleships that we've ever built or designed and deployed has been the aircraft carrier.
That's right.
And USS Ford is out there showing us that right now, where she has been able to swing from one theater to the next, from EUCOM down to SOUTHCOM, and be part of Homeland Defense, and has done that mission, with aplomb wherever she goes. It was an expensive platform. I think 16 billion, but I think she's earned every cent of that 16 billion on the multiple deployments that she's conducted over the last couple of years. And then submarines. So you look at the undersea domain and the function of platforms in the undersea. I was up at an event in Washington last week. The U.S. Naval Institute had their annual December event on sea power. Bill Tody, one of my friends who's a submariner, was speaking, and he opined on his command tour on USS Indianapolis. And he loved that ship. He's written about the World War II Indianapolis, took the bombs at Tinian. And he said, they decommed my boat halfway through the life of my boat. We turned the corner in 2000 with about almost 100 SSNs, and then dropped that number to 50. And Indianapolis was one of the casualties of that. And we've now realized that was a huge mistake. And so we're now trying to claw back submarine production and readiness to put more assets in the undersea domain. We're looking at some asymmetric things too, but all these things are important and all part of the maritime policy statement. Let's go to Chuck. Chuck, you served in multiple positions in the sea services over your career. You've been a great friend and someone who has tremendous commonality with me in the places that we've worked and the places we've been. What would you like the audience to take away from the maritime policy statement?
Well, sir, if I could sum it up in one word, it's urgency. You have to look at.
Amen.
Yeah. I'm responsible for the technology and weapons advancement part of that, but it's across the board. You mentioned carriers and submarines. The first analysis I did after getting a master's in analysis was the new attack submarine, now Virginia. Since then, we have not introduced successfully a surface combatant. We tried DDGX, turned into Zumwalt, didn't go into series production. CGX, after the AOA decided we couldn't afford it. Everybody knows about the Constellation, it's been in the news. And LCS was going to be the answer for littoral warfare, and we truncated that by. So yes, carriers, great. The Ford worked after a long birthing cycle. Virginia's been in series production since the late 90s. What's missing is a successful surface combatant, and we are feeling that gap. 15 years ago, Admiral Greenert, when he was CNO, said, I want trucks. Said, let's put the development into the weapons they carry, not into the platform itself. Had we followed his advice, we could have cranked out a series of simpler surface combatants. Now, I understand no single raindrop thinks it caused the flood. What slowed us down? Was it JSIDs? It's a very cumbersome process. Got it. Is it NAVC? They're very careful and deliberate in their methodology. Got it. Congress likes us to keep building things we're already building because it's solid foundation for jobs. Everything we did with those combatants contributed to their demise. And I freely admit I was in OpNav and OSD for a long part of that process. We made it too hard because after the Cold War, we thought we had all the time in the world. And the message I'd like people to take away from the MPS is we don't have time. They document very well, I think, how the threat has changed. Small unmanned vehicles threat. We're doing a study at CNA right now, how to defend a combatant in port from UAV swarms. You can look at the technology that's changed. Additive manufacturing is finally maturing. Everything is changing, but we have to move faster in adopting it. And that's the basic problem.
Yeah, thanks. You mentioned Admiral Greenert, Chief of Naval Operations Extraordinaire, man near and dear to my heart. He was a great mentor to me, and he challenged me in many different ways when I was N81. And, you know, the tough part of anybody that worked in N8 at the time was that the CNO had done all of our jobs. You know, so he'd been 80, he knew what 81 was all about. You know, he was N8, and then he became the vice chief, and he was still N8 when he became the vice chief. And then as CNO, there was, you know, nothing, and nowhere that he didn't know where all the skeletons were buried. And, you know, when somebody was trying to BS him. So when I was N81, he called me in one day and he said, okay, you know, I want to look at, I want you to do some futures briefs for me. And the first question for you, and I'll feed you questions, will be, is it payload or is it platform? And, you know, that was the guidance I got. And, you know, if you knew Admiral Greenert, you took the ball and ran with it. You get some qualifying statements, but he liked people that went out and basically self-motivated and were hard charging and would go dig into the stuff. So I created this brief, which I'm pretty proud of. I'm not sure that they liked it that much, but it was, I found a book in a bookstore in Charlottesville, Virginia. It was a copy of the Southern Literary Messenger from 1847. And in that book, a famous naval officer who unfortunately went to the wrong side in the Civil War, Matthew Fontaine Maury, who was the navigator of the Navy, wrote under a pseudonym as a lieutenant. And he criticized the Bureau of Ships and the Bureau of Ordnance for stepping on each other's toes. You know, so we're talking about payload and platform. So what better analogy to look at BU-ORD and BU ships at the time? And his point was, don't tell naval officers what kind of ships we need to sail, because we are the ones that go out and sail them. You ordnance guys are a bunch of, you know, kinetic people. I used that term back then. So I threw this book on the table, and it's just dusty, and the leather was all decaying, and all this, you know, kind of smoke goes up in the room, and I could see all the directors sitting around the table going, what the hell is Fogo up to? And we had this great discussion about payload over platform. And where do you think I came down on? Where do you think Admiral Greenert was at the time? Was it payload or was it platform?
It's payload.
Payload, yeah. Modularity, right? I mean, that's one of the things that unfortunately didn't work out with LCS. I think it was a good idea in theory, but we couldn't actually execute in the construction and the employment of the ship, you know, mine countermeasures modules and all that. But you want to be able to swap things out. We need commonality in platforms and commonality in design, but it's really the weapon systems that are changing, right? Directed energy and long range precision strike and all these newfangled things that we don't even know about yet in the undersea, and cyber weapons.
Well, and I know the CMS has written extensively on where the carrier fits and had forms on the carrier. Think about how many different payloads have been on the same aircraft
Oh, yeah.
carrier
Yeah.
over its lifespan. And is that a good investment for the American people to have a platform that can adopt new payloads as the combat changes? Submarines, the same thing.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. So it is fascinating work, and a maritime policy statement merely opens up this door to dive into a discussion. And really, that's the value thing, right? So it's going to go up and occupy a space on a virtual coffee table because
right.
it's digital now. But people are going to look at it, read it on the Hill, and they're going to want to talk to us, and they're going to want to talk to the Navy, and they're going to want to talk to think tanks and other experts about, well, what do you guys think? You know, where should we be putting the taxpayers' money so we get the return on the investment and the bang for the buck that we're after?
Sure.
Oh, yeah, go ahead, Joe.
Add to that, Bob Work, famous
Oh,
naval
yeah,
analyst.
yeah, great
Eh,
guy, a
great
brilliant
guy.
mind,
He
brilliant
would
mind.
always harp on where are you on the cost curve,
Mhm.
and are you
Yeah.
on the wrong side? And I think the MPS makes a great point that look at the Red Sea. We're shooting down cheap missiles with very expensive missiles, and we've been waiting for probably the last 12 years. Remember, first it was going to be railgun, then it was going to be smart munitions, now directed energy. And other than taking out some UAVs, I haven't seen a directed energy weapon, whether high powered microwave or laser, being operational. So we need a cheaper way to do the mission, not these exquisite weapons.
Yeah, you know, I mean, Bob Burke was one of the hardest working undersecretaries of the Navy that I ever knew. Everybody loved him. Then he went on to be DepSecDef. He has a brilliant mind, and later went on to lead the Naval Institute as chairman. But he always used to talk about, we're all familiar with the term, our listeners may not be, the offset strategy, right? And, you know, he was looking at asymmetry in the form of less expensive, more modern mobile weapon systems. And I remember being invited by General Petraeus at the Munich Security Conference back in, I don't know, 2019, where Bob Work was in the room with General Petraeus. General Petraeus was leading a panel, and he came up to me and he goes, "Well, you're a component commander in Europe. Well, what do you have to say about this? Would you like to, you know, take the mic and talk about it?" And I did. And I said, you know, we just came off an exercise, Trident Juncture, where it was 50,000 soldiers, sailors, airmen, and Marines, 70 ships, including Harry S. Truman Strike Group, all the associated support, Iwo Jima Strike Group, all the associated support, 265 U.S. and Allied aircraft that were flying in airspace all over Northern Europe, around Norway, to push out a Russian enemy that had, you know, violated Article 5 and come into Norway. We lifted 7 brigades in 30 days equivalency. And I was convinced that mass was the way to go. And so I took the counterpoint to the offset strategy, but I will be man enough to admit today I was wrong and Bob Work was right. And the direction that the country is going is in the direction of Ukraine, with small, mobile, uncrewed weapon systems. You know, we got a lot of them out there, but that is no substitute for the core, which is the carrier strike groups, the destroyers that did the majority of the work in the Red Sea. And hopefully someday we get a frigate and other ships that kind of round out this fleet. Who knows what the battleship looks like? I think DDGX is a great, you know, great looking battleship, you know, if you upgun it, and plus a 15,000 tons, right, in design. But that offset strategy is real, and asymmetry is real, and it's a force multiplier for us. Anybody else have any comments on that? No. All right. We'll go on to next question. So, Sinc, you changed the format from hard copy on the Navy League website to completely digital. So a little sea story about that. I did, I don't know, 11 years in Europe and a number of different jobs over there. And as I get more senior, people would ask my opinion more. And so one day somebody came in, I forget who it was, and they go, "Do you know that the stars and stripes that you get in all the exchanges throughout Europe, you know, everybody knows who served in the military knows what it is. I mean, it's been carrying the news since WW1, right? To the troops in the forward battlefield and everything. Well, Stars and Stripes is going to go digital. I'm like, what? No way. I like picking up my Stars and Stripes at the Navy Exchange in Naples and reading. It's little, small, so I protested loudly to the folks in Stars and Stripes headquarters, and they go, well, it's very expensive for us to produce this newspaper. And I was like, doesn't matter. This is something tangible. The troops can have it. They like to see their pictures in there. I mean, it's an American iconic institution. You can't get rid of it and go digital. And they didn't. I don't know if it's because of me. I don't think they listen to me, but they decided that, public opinion polls were don't take our hard copy away from us. You had to make that call. Why'd you make it? And do you think we're better off, or do you think we're worse off than we were?
So I made that call. Thank you for the question. I made that call, and I'm proud of us making that call for multiple reasons. Not so much to save money, but we need a dynamic document for a dynamic world. The world has changed so doggone much. And we printed this thing, and I've been doing the maritime policy for probably 6-7 years. As soon as you get finished printing it, and you go to the publishers and you put it on the table of the congressmen or their folks, it's already out of date. The very second you do it. So we need something that was more dynamic, that we could update, that we could get after. And just think about, since January, when we published digitally the maritime policy statement, what has happened? We have a new SecNav, and he's got initiatives. We've got CNO Caudle and his C notes. We've got the national security strategy we just got finished talking about, the Golden Fleet that the president's talking about, Midnight Hammer, changes to come in the COCOMs and the Department of War and OPNAV organizations that we read about every day, going from PEOs, program executive offices, to program acquisition executives, starting with robotic and autonomous systems. The Coast Guard has issued their Force Design 2028. The Commandant of the Marine Corps, he hasn't slowed down with the 39th Commander's planning guidance and his Force Design reshape. Mr. Duffy, Secretary Duffy from Transcom, he's trying to revitalize MSC. All this has happened since we published the maritime policy.
Yeah.
And it would be completely out of date, completely useless if we just had a printed document and you had to wait 2 years to print another one out. By doing it this way, we, with the great staff here at the Navy League, we can update it. We can add these different nuances, see what difference has changed, try to make it simpler. Because quite frankly, where do people get their information now? From their phone. It's got to be.
You got that right.
You can't get it on your phone. It doesn't exist.
That's right.
So that's why we did it. We're proud to do it and happy we've done it.
Yeah. So you're kind of updating in stride then.
I'm trying to keep up with the Joneses, trying to get ahead. Yes, sir.
Yeah. What was the last change you made and when?
So this update is going to be going out here in the next week or two. And it will have many of the things here. We're going to have columns where we kind of highlight what the difference was between our initial draft in January and where we are today. And then it provides everyone, whether it be congressmen, their staffers, our Navy League, others, one-stop shopping for the important documents that are driving the urgency that Chuck Werchado just got finished talking about, that is needed across all of our services in order to get after what the administration, Congress, and everybody else knows we need to go back from
Flood tide. Flood tide.
That's right.
You want a flood tide.
So it's all connected.
Yeah, absolutely. Scott.
Yeah, and then just to add on to that is the timeliness of the document, to keep it fresh and salient. We've also learned over the last couple of times of doing this, waiting for every 2 years, we're out of sync with the timing of the budget cycle. And what people want is they don't have time to read reams and reams and reams of documents. A 33-page document is just impossible for most decision makers to read at one time. So what we can do is update our document, be like Sinc said, the Admiral said, a go-to document, but also we're a resource that says, can you give me a page and a half on some subject on something because I'm getting ready to go into a vote or I'm going to go to a committee hearing and I want to have some information that I can have in my coat pocket that I can pull out. So we found that being able to update it in sync, in time with these major budget cycles and at the times of the year, that becomes very, very important and makes our document that much more valuable to people because it's not old. I mean, in some cases in Washington, a month or two old, and that's old information already. Something has changed, and documents, budgets have changed, priorities have changed, the world situation have changed, and for us to be able to go in there digitally and update that document, it becomes something that a staffer would just love to have his hands on because then he doesn't have to do that kind of large work to do.
Oh, you're absolutely right. I mean, we're up on the hill for the shipbuilding breakfast. I had
Yeah.
people coming up to me and saying, "Hey, what's going on? What's going on in shipbuilding? You know, what's our Navy policy on you know, the new amphibious platform that the Marine Corps has now embraced. The Navy has embraced the design on to provide the Marine Corps with a literal maritime capability, which is the MLS,
LMS.
LMS,
I'm
Yeah.
sorry, LSM.
LSM.
Yep.
Yeah. So, you know, lots and lots and lots of changes. And that one has been percolating for a long time, but I know we picked a Dutch design. When the Secretary was with us, Secretary of the Navy was with us at America's Future Fleet, our kickoff dinner about a week and a half ago, he talked about, you know, print design. So we're going to get away from the problems that plagued the Constellation class frigate of making alterations and changes. In fact, he said, there's any changes, you know, ASN RDA Potter will bring that individual proposing the changes to my office at 1700 on Friday afternoon. We'll have a discussion about it and I'll stay as long as it takes. But, you know, go ahead, Scott.
Yeah. One other final thing on this with the being able to update it in a timely fashion is on a Navy League side of thing is that when we do advocacy and we get something from the Hill that's important, have been able to turn around and get a sense and then get support from all of our different councils all over and saying, hey, we need to put this through and get a letter to Congress right away. And this has been really, really, I think, successful for us in getting a new piece of legislation out very quickly or getting support and pulling that information very, very quickly so that we can advocate properly for our constituents and for the Hill and so get that information out quickly. I think that's been very successful for us.
Yeah. Oh, no, absolutely. I agree.
Admiral,
Yes.
in conjunction with what both you and Scott had said, the LSM is a perfect example of what has occurred with these documents have been recently issued, like the acquisition transformation strategy and the executive order on acquisition reform and industrial base. And what they say is we need to go more to the commercial model. We need to go faster. And that LSM is, they're going to be using the acquisition processes that MARAD used, the ship construction manager, in order to get that platform out there. They're taking the design, an existing design, and they're going to have a commercial entity actually do that contracting with the shipyards and keep the normal bureaucratic processes out of it, just like what the Maritime Administration demonstrated with the national security training vessels that they had produced 5 vessels. The last one I think is under construction, and they're essentially built on budget and under time. So seeing that implementation during just the first year of this administration, there's more than paper. They're actually taking these actions. I mean, the Coast Guard got money in the Reconciliation Act, like $23 billion, and they already have ice breakers under contract using our foreign allies as to build the first couple and bringing that technology back to the United States. So I think that's one of the things that's most impressive is there's more than paper. And what's made it difficult, and as I've was reviewing the latest version that we finished editing in October, because of the transformation strategy, and because the as has just been released afterwards. And we don't have the NDA has been passed after that. We'll need to do an update a lot more quicker than we normally have. Things are moving at the speed that we have never seen, I think, in decades.
You are listening to Maritime Nation, the Center for Maritime Strategy's podcast designed to dive deeply into the policy challenges facing America's sea services and the role of the United States as a sea power on the global stage. We aim to provide you with the highest quality analysis on the most pressing maritime security challenges by joining in conversation with key experts and practitioners. This season is produced with support from Dataminr. Dataminr is recognized as one of the world's leading AI businesses. The company's clients are the first to know about high-impact events and emerging risks so they can mitigate and manage crises more effectively. Dataminr solutions are relied on 24/7 by hundreds of clients, including the Department of Defense, in over 100 countries across 6 continents to help them solve real-world problems. Here at CMS, our whole team uses Dataminr's First Alert to stay up to date on breaking news or crises that impact our national security or the security of our allies and partners. Yeah, John, you bring up a great point. And it's also timely and kind of ironic because I know you're not familiar with the fact that I took the entire Center for Maritime Strategy. There are 4 of us yesterday that went to the Philadelphia Naval Shipyard for our second visit in about a year. We were there last October, and we saw the national security multi-mission vessel under construction. There are 5 under construction. This is, as you know, Admiral Buzz Busby's program when he was MARAD. Those vessels have come in under both U.S. leadership and now Korean leadership because Hanwha bought the yard last December, and they are established there as Hanwha USA. Got the orange crane painted all up now. It looks beautiful. They're building those ships generally on time and on budget, thanks to that vessel construction manager. And we heard the secretary say last week that that was the model for speed and acquisition. So VCM, we wrote about it. The VCM that's supporting the construction of those ships in Philly and doing a hell of a good job is Tote Services. And there is no middleman. So the government just kind of sits back and says, you have a design, shipyard, you go build it. And VCM, the vessel construction manager, assists, cajoles, scolds, or pardon the expression, kicks ass when necessary to get those ships completed on time, outfits them with all the equipment, all the safety equipment. We saw the lifeboats going on the Lone Star State yesterday. She's almost done, looking beautiful. And then does the sea trials and turns the platform over, keys ready to go, start the engines and go. The ship's got a beautiful engine room. And oh, by the way, those ships could easily be converted into hospital ships, into command ships to take the place of Blue Ridge and Mount Whitney that are going to go on, 60 years old. I love the Mount Whitney. You guys have heard me say this before. They could be tenders. They could be, any kind of support ship, auxiliary ship. And we don't have enough of those in Military Sea Lift Command or in MARAD to go around. And this is a very cost-effective, platform that's being built with this model of VCMs. And I'm really happy, we wrote about it. I'd like to say it was us that brought it to people's attention, but people know about VCMs and they've adopted it here in the US. And I really hope that program with the LSM comes together. Chuck, you're going to say something?
Yes, sir. I think LSM was a great example because I sat through a lot of the meetings in its early selection, and the Marine representatives kept saying, we want it simple, we want it cheap, we want it expendable. And the pushback from Navy, specifically NAVSEA, was, no, it has to be survivable. No, it has to be able to defend itself. No. And the customer is the Marine Corps, but Navy knew better than the Marines did. And by the time they were done, that 150 million ship cost 400 million, and we couldn't afford it in volume. So I salute the secretary for going to an exterior design and saying, I'm not going to change it. We need to keep things simple.
Yeah.
Back to the platform.
Yeah. Hey, Colonel Cabaniss, what do you think about LSM? You want to say anything about it? Are you happy to have that platform coming on board for your Marines? Because once a Marine, always a Marine, whether you're retired or not, you're still a Marine Colonel.
Admiral, mobility in the littorals has been the #1 priority for a long time. So delivering that in the near term is something I know it's essential. It's the way the Commandant looks. You know, it's separate from his 3.0 MU that he sees as the North Star. It is essential. But I think to answer the earlier question is we have this tension. I left Afghanistan in 2009 and went to War College and then ended up in the Don. And I was shocked when all we were talking about was China and it was 2011. Nobody was talking about Afghanistan. And so the way I kind of did it is always looked at it is the building's thinking about the future and budgets, and the people on the tactical edge about how we do it now. And we never do any trade-offs. We always say it's one or the other instead of we have to do both. You know, to those the numbered fleets and the MEFs that are forward. I know the MEFs forward 1 and 3 MEF. The LSM is essential to how they want to operate. The question is it the right solution 10 years from now? But as everybody, you know, as we understand with shipping, that some things we're buying right now, we're going to have to use for 40 years. So that's just the way it is. But I think that's the thing that we've never done very well is make the trade-off between what do we need to fight tonight, tomorrow night, next month, next year, and what are we going to need 5 years from now? And I want to remind the Admiral one thing for Trident Juncture, since I was in 2MEF when we did it. We got hit head on by Hurricane Florence.
Yeah.
Paused for a week and then deployed the vast majority of the MEF to Norway, which I thought was a pretty awesome thing that we should remind people from time to time.
Yeah, I forgot about that. Thanks for bringing that up, Chris, because that was an extraordinary feat. And, you know, while the home base and unfortunately the families had to deal with the aftermath of the hurricane, you had Marine housing flooded, you had depots and warehouses flooded, you had equipment that you couldn't get embarked on the ships. So you came over and General Neary was leading that crowd with you and a host of other very qualified Marines. And we said, well, we're going to be short a number of capabilities. And the Marines reminded me, hey, that's why we have maritime pre-positioning. We got a lot of forces that are already there, you know, in caves and things like that. And I can tell you, I was tracking the statistics on this, and it was absolutely amazing. Of all the vehicles that augmented and filled the gaps in the seams in Trident Juncture, and we had 50,000 tanks or rolling, or sorry, 10,000 tanks or rolling vehicles on the ground, 50,000 troops, 10,000 vehicles. There was only one that didn't start when we put the key in the ignition, which means that maritime pre-po worked, and in time of war, it would work as an augmentation force for our troops, our Marines in the field. So thanks for bringing that up as a great example.
Yeah, and the other thing that we also learned from there was we had to stress the logistics system, which I know is a priority across everybody. Is we put a demand on the logistics system in Northern Europe that hadn't been there in a while, and it took a little bit to get everything going. But I think that was one of the bigger lessons for us. Is it's something we don't ever practice. You know, we can get there, but how do we sustain it over time? And I think that was a great lesson for us. And I know that's a lesson that they're talking about in the Pacific. And, you know, back to the LSM, it's going to be essential to moving the force around.
Yeah, hey, I want the audience to know I didn't pay you to make that comment because this is one of my favorite subjects, and it is apropos to a maritime policy statement. And you're absolutely right. You know, what I learned from Trident Juncture and unassing 7 equivalent brigades from all over Europe and getting them into Norway in 30 days, because from the time we pulled the starter's pistol and shot, it was 30 days until everything arrived. The 50,000 troops, the 10,000 vehicles, the 70 ships, 265 aircraft. That was amazing. I coined the phrase, logistics is the 6th domain of warfare. The combatant commander took issue with that. You know, let me know, why are you saying that? I read that in Stars and Stripes, the hard copy that was in the exchange, by the way. And I said, because logistics is a legitimate domain, sir. He goes, no, it's not. You know, we have the land, the sea, the air, cyber, and space. We don't need another one. And I go, well, what's the definition of a domain? And, you know, pregnant pause. You can go into a lot of joint pubs and you can find words. NATO actually has a definition, which is, you know, a domain is something that enables warfighting in another domain. It's synergistic, right? So logistics enables warfighting in the land, the sea, the air, cyber, and space. So as far as I'm concerned, it is the sixth domain of warfare. And as I was running around doing my battlefield circ, I actually felt for a moment that I wasn't an admiral, I was a general, because it was so cool. I was flying all over Norway and all of the, even with the king and the crown prince and a whole bunch of the prime minister and a bunch of troops and a bunch of other flags. I'd go out in the field and talk to the troops. It's freezing cold out there. They had to get food, they had to get blankets, tents, something to keep them warm, and weapons that worked in a very austere environment. And I'd remind them of what Alexander the Great told his troops, during the great wars that he fought. And that was, should I ever lose a battle, my logisticians know that they will be the first that I slay. And people look at me like, does he really mean that? And I was like, yeah, come on. But it's really true. Sinc, you're going to say something.
Well, the old saying, another old saying that amateurs practice
there you go.
tactics.
Yep.
Professionals practice logistics. And as a honorary supply corps officer,
Are you?
Pete Stamatopoulos gave me that honor years
I
ago.
never got that when I was there.
Yes, sir. It's all true.
Bravo Zulu. That's great. Okay, let's move on. So for all of you gentlemen, the format of the maritime policy statement also changed from being more stovepiped according to, what does each of the services do, to a blended format that has synergy across all the sea services. We are, after all, the Navy and Marine Corps are the most joint force in the world, always have been. People go, oh, it's just the Navy and Marine Corps saying that every time. It's true. We have worked together as a joint force prior to Goldwater Nichols. We know how to do that. So now we've got this blending across all of the sea services, Military Sea Lift Command, MARAD, the Coast Guard, the Marines, and the United States Navy. How's this worked out? And in your opinion, was it necessary?
It absolutely was necessary. And Scott, he'll go into more detail on it. He talked about it a little bit already. But you look at the challenges on readiness alone, okay, are not unique to the Navy or to the Marine Corps or to the Coast Guard, and they're all tied together. So what if the Marine Corps have got the best warfighters, but they only have 38% readiness on the amphibs and they can't get anywhere? All right. Those things are connected. The Coast Guard just got 28 or whatever it was, $25 billion. All right. Great. Do they have enough Coast Guardsmen to put on those ships in order to get after what they need to? And have they ever talked to the Navy about what they have done in readiness? So these things are all connected, Scott.
Yeah, I think that in some respects it's harder for us because we have to look broader across everything to make sure that we see those connections. And so you need to have enough experience and have all the documents, looking at them all together and saying, okay, I got to get this down to 2 pages instead of 35 so that people can digest it. At the same time, I think it opens up those people's minds to things that we've seen happen in our own careers, where you spend a lot of money, you talk about budgets to build a ship. The ship gets built, but nobody talks about the total ownership cost of the life of the ship.
Absolutely.
And it's like, I'm gonna build this ship, but I'm gonna have it in the inventory for the next 35 or 40 years, or in case of a carrier, 50 years. And nobody talks about those additional costs. I think an aircraft carrier used to be something like $100,000 a day just sitting at the piers. And all of the costs, the manpower costs, the training costs, and then the upgrades, the periodic upgrades that have to happen to upgrade weapon systems and stuff like that. So unless you see it broadly across that, and you just focus only on shipbuilding, but shipbuilding is not the only issue you have to think about. It's like, what do I do with the ship after I got it out on the pier? The ship is at its best on the first day that it's on the pier. And after that, the readiness starts to go down because the ship has to be painted, it has to be manned, it has to be trained, it has to be supplied, it has to be sustained, and then you have to get it out of water, deploy it. And right now, as of today, we are still deploying almost 1/3 of our fleet. There's 290 ships in the inventory right now, battle force ships, and we've got 101 at sea deployed. And of that, those that are currently actually at sea, it's 64. So 1/3 of our fleet is operationally deployed right now. And if we don't pull this together like we've done with our maritime policy statement, you won't see all these things.
Yeah. No, absolutely. Anybody else have a comment?
Just simply, we need each other. If you look at the Navy does not have icebreakers, and that's where a lot of the Coast Guard investment's going to go. The gray warfare that we're facing is not really suitable for a kinetic force, but it's great for Coast Guard who can show up and take people into custody. So I think we depend on them. The Marines, it's obvious. We say inside, for the first island chain in a war with China, you're going to have 3 kinds of forces: subs, SEALs, and Marines. So if you don't have them forward, then you're not going to have much of a fight. So there's dependencies on each other. And of course, both of those services depend on the Navy to resupply, to get them there, and to take charge once we've suppressed the defenses enough to go kinetic forward. So I think it's a need, the fact that we need each other. And the one caveat I'd say is when you hear about the Golden Fleet, once it's announced, we're going to have a lot of focus on what the number is. And I'll say, frankly, nobody who does force structure analysis cares about the number, because the number is a byproduct of buying the right number of ships, the right number of the right kinds of ships. Sorry. The total number, we did the 2016 force structure assessment for Admiral Richardson, came out with 355. President Trump endorsed it in his first term. Congress codified it into law. Tell me if we have 355 ships. So you come up with the number by building the right force. You don't start with a number and work backwards.
And,
Yeah.
and Admiral, the
Yes.
other element that I think is new and what our focus is on the last couple editions of the maritime policy is the industrial base aspect of it, because the root cause, we haven't gotten to the 355, not necessarily because the money wasn't available, because Congress has been providing the money, but the industrial base couldn't support it. We've let it degrade to the point since the end of the Cold War, where no matter how much money you put at it, we don't have the workforce, we don't have the second and third tier producers, we don't have the strategic critical materials. And all of this has been identified by Congress over the last couple of years. But now, because the Reconciliation Act and this administration, they're putting a lot more money to go behind all of that policy and fix those root causes. Unfortunately, it's going to take years to do so. So even as you put more money in, but I think one of the elements of that's in the maritime strategy that's new is the Maritime Industrial Base Office, which was within an AVC portfolio, but now it's been upgraded to being a direct reporting program manager. And it is over the last couple of years, and with more, they've invested $8 billion so far to rebuild the submarine industrial base. And there's like another 18 or $20 billion more program for it. And then it's now been given the responsibility to work on the surface ship industrial base. And that's where they're beginning to tie in with the Maritime Administration in order to try to rebuild the shipyard capacity. And then the administration has implemented through its diplomacy, bringing in the foreign builders like Hanwha, which you saw in Philadelphia, as well as Hyundai and others, working teaming agreements with the other shipyards. And maybe they'll be, and I think the Canadians have bought Gulf Copper for an icebreaker. So we're bringing all of this change in policy and seeing it implemented, I think is what is so much different than we've seen before. But the industrial base section highlights all of these changes that has all happened over the last couple of years. And frankly, that's why I say there's been so much that's happened over the last 3 months, but it's all been consistent. We have executive orders, we have resources been applied to it, we have an NDAA that streamlines the acquisition processes, and that's consistent with what the Secretary of War has done. I mean, it's just remarkable from my perspective to see all these stars align and actual action and resources, which is what you need to implement a strategy rather than talk about it. So I think a lot of our recommendations that we've made in the past have required this resources and this oversight and the supervision at a high level and accountability to actually see it done rather than put like shelfware that we've seen in the past. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, John. I mean, all great inputs. And, we started with Scott talking about sustainment. I couldn't agree with you more. We used to build ships and not worry about it and say, well, somebody else will figure that out. That's further out in the FIDIP, right? Big mistake. You need to know what the costs are through a 30-year life of a destroyer versus a 50-year life of an aircraft carrier. And it's not getting any cheaper to operate these things. Admiral Caudle has come out very strongly and saying this is the fleet we have and it's going to be the fleet we have for the next 30, 40, 50 years. Columbia is going to be around till like 2070 when we get her in the water and start building follow-on classes or follow-on numbers of the ship. And, we've got to take sustainment into account. We were having this discussion this morning. I was over at the American Academy of Diplomacy. We have a new national security strategy. Somebody asked the question last week at the U.S. Naval Institute's thing up at the Spy Museum. Hey, of an ASN reporter asked the question, hey, it doesn't say anything about shipbuilding or about naval forces in there. Are you upset about that? I think the answer was a good one. Well, there's not a lot of national security strategies that talk about individual platforms in the way in which we're going to shape policy in America. That's really a national defense strategy or a maritime strategy. And I'm hoping to see both of those in the very near future. What we can take from the national security strategy is that it's important to have a Navy and a very powerful Navy. I think that's underscored in the statements made about China and Taiwan. And it also kind of is a reset. Probably a year and a half ago, I was on this podcast with the great Professor Emeritus Paul Kennedy of Yale University, who wrote one of my favorite all-time books in '87, The Rise and Fall of Great Empires.
Yeah,
He had another book that was an illustrated history of World War II. We talked about it. It was beautiful. And I said, sir, what are you working on? And it was, V2 2.0 of Rise and Fall of Great Empires and still yet to come. I can't wait to read it when it comes out. But, we've gotten ourselves involved in imperial overstretch. And what we can do, is look at this strategy, which says focus on the homeland. What national security strategy doesn't? Right. Focus on Latin America and let's get our borders sound. And then let's prioritize the pacing threat as China. So we're going to do less in Africa, CENTCOM, or EUCOM. And that's been coming for a long time. So it should not be a surprise to anybody. But I submit, and this was a discussion I was having over at the American Academy of Diplomacy, what we need is an audit of what we've got, whether it's domestic or international projection of power. What do we have in the kit? How many ships? How many weapons? What are we ready to do today? And Admiral Caudle's got new ideas about the GMRP and how we're going to take some risk and use forces in crisis response. And I think it's great. That's being refined right now. But what's in the kit bag and what can we commit to? So you don't have a new administration coming in every 4 years and saying, we're going to do all this, but those policies just kind of become hot air because you don't have the capability. So let's understand what our capability is. And then when we commit to a policy, we should know that we can actually execute that policy in terms of whether it's humanitarian assistance, disaster relief, whatever is the new agency for USAID or FEMA, to conduct operations overseas, or our diplomatic corps in order to do negotiations and provide some kind of a peacekeeping force that's going to, toe the line and keep the lines of demarcation, Israel, Gaza, Ukraine, Russia, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. We've got to be realistic. Otherwise, we're going to be victims of the subject of Paul Kennedy's book. With that, gentlemen, I think we've reached about 49 minutes here. This has been an incredible discussion. Briefly, a minute or so, 30 seconds, I want to give each of you the last word. So I'm going to go in order of online first. John, any final comments from you?
Admiral, I think that you just left off with the national security strategy, and in it, they talk about revitalizing the defense industrial base.
Right.
And that is what's consistent with what we have in our Navy League maritime policy. strategy document. The other element is that we talked about sustainment, and one element that's in the strategy is on the U.S. Merchant Marine. And although there hasn't been any actual progress been made in increasing the maritime industry, with the implementation of the executive order, which is supposed to be coming out with a maritime action plans that were due in November, but are late because of the government shutdown, with the Congress's reintroduction of the Ships for America Act and the Senate hearing that was very positive. If we see those elements all coming together over the next year, I think that we will actually see progress, just in the way that we have seen progress in the industrial base efforts that have been done by DoD. We should see the same type of effort on an interagency basis as called for in the Ships Act in the maritime arena. Because right now, we don't have the capability and capacity to sustain our forces for a protracted war. The assets that were used in your exercises in the past, many of those vessels are no more. The Army has gotten out of the Aeroflow preposition program, and the Marines are restructuring theirs by disseminating cargo ashore overseas. But right now we have, and that's one of the reasons why the LSM is a critical capability that's necessary. So we'll have a lot more to say on the maritime arena next year, or as we update the maritime policy. But I am really hopeful, and frankly, I'm usually been considered a half empty glass person. I'm more than half full now because of seeing everybody in alignment. And if they do have another Reconciliation Act next year, then there should be sufficient resources to be able to carry on the momentum. Because I think that what's constrained us in the past is we just didn't have the money be able to do it, as well as to rebuild it from the bottoms up, which is what I talked about before, going after the root causes. So I'm very hopeful, and I hope that the next edition will show more progress. The current one shows what is planned, and hopefully it will document more positive results next time.
Thank you, John. Chris, over to you.
Yeah, just something brief. I think the league sits in a great position to help all the senior leaders understand technological maturity. We've all been in the building. We've all heard people talk about whatever whiz bang they're going to do today, but to help them understand, here's what you can do today so we can have the best naval service, maritime services out there today while we still build for the future, and help them make investments. Because we sit along the way, I think we talked about that before. What can we practically do now? As Secretary LaPlante used to say, production, production, production. What can we produce today with technology and munitions while still making the smart investments for the future to stay ahead? And I think we used to be really good at that. And I think the league sits in a great spot to touch all the different aspects about what is in the realm of the possible today, and not get too worried about one or the other. But I learned something when I was in the building. Somebody talked about the 30-year shipbuilding plan. And I said, what do you mean the 1-year shipbuilding plan? They're like, it's 30 years. And I go, no, we do it every year. So it's a 1-year plan. Yeah. And I learned in Iraq from a guy named Cale Weston from the State Department, we worry about going big. Let's go long. Let's really have a 30-year plan that the workforce can get behind, that industry can get behind, that will deliver that we need. And how do we do that? Because again, every year for the last 30 years, we've had some kind of CR, almost every year. It's going to happen. But again, how do we get people to look much longer? What does a multi-year look like, 10 years or 15 years? Because we know we're going to need a Navy. We know we're going to need a Coast Guard. We know we're going to need MARAD. So let's just get over it and start thinking about what can we deliver now, and then shoot, what's the objective force 10 years from now, 15, and try to deliver that. And I think the league sits in a great place to hold people accountable. Hey, you said you could do it. Let's deliver it, because, the joint and combined force needs it. It's essential.
All right. Thanks, Chris. Chuck, any last comments?
Yeah, just one, sir. Excellent discussion. I would say that if I were assessing it, I'd say we might have discussed the platforms a little bit more than the payloads. So although I'd be happy to sit down for another session discussing payloads, I want to tell everybody the MPS does. So there's an excellent discussion about cost effectiveness of payloads in the MPS. And I think that's really important going forward, is getting away from exquisite weapons as well as platforms.
Excellent. Yeah, I don't disagree with you, and I think that's something we can update in the digital copy. Scott?
I think we've kind of hit on this one area throughout the discussion today, and time is the fungible asset here. And if we don't understand that and get that in the right context, we're always going to be trying to play catch up. And I think the maritime services, with the advocacy from the Navy League, are well positioned for that, because we think in terms of ship lives of 30 and 50 years. And as you, Admiral, talked about earlier, thinking of a national strategic strategy that's almost like back in the day of the containment. It has to go past the next administration, because we're talking about shipbuilding programs that are going to be 2 or 3 or 4 administrations from now. And so if you don't have that idea of what's urgent and what you have to plan for the future, you're going to get all bollocksed up. You get your event horizon becomes too small. And that's the failure of not being able to think long. As you said, Chris, if you don't think long, you're not going to get there.
Excellent. Thanks, Scott. Sinc, the last word.
Sir, thank you. I want to thank you, sir, and the Center for Maritime Strategy for the important work that you are doing. You've raised the bar. You've increased the understanding. You have helped us support, educate, and advocate for our maritime forces, which is critically important. The world is wet and getting wetter. So what happens in this domain continues to be very important. So thank you for that. I want to thank my colleagues who are here, both virtually and present. Also, Travis Reese, who is another great writer, part of our committee. And we're not standing stagnant. We've added 2 more. Vice Admiral Joanna Noonan, who was superintendent at the Maritime Academy, Coast Guard Admiral, and McPog Heath Jones to our committee to get more Coast Guard into our updates. So I want to bring them on, and I want to say to everybody, stay tuned. Stay tuned to our Navy League. Stay tuned to what comes out in our maritime policy. And if you're not a member of the Navy League, you're missing the boat. So join the Navy League.
Outstanding. That's the last word. And what a great way to wrap up, folks. Thank you to Rear Admiral Sinc Harris for your selfless service over all your years in active duty and what you've done since you retired, Sinc. Scott Sundt, same thing. Chuck Werchado, Chris Cabaniss, and Jon Kaskin for joining us today on Maritime Nation. I'd like to thank our listeners for joining us each month. And if you haven't heard our previous episodes, you can always catch up on Spotify or Apple Podcasts. Episodes and all content described here today can be found on our website at www.centerformaritimestrategy.org. Everything's free, including the download PDF file of our book and our weekly newsletter. So don't miss out there. I also like to thank our sponsor, Dataminr, for their support, and James Peterson, our sound engineer, who has sat here for the last 4 years doing this podcast with me. Stay tuned for the next episode of Maritime Nation in January of 2026, and Merry Christmas, everybody.